Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Okay, so this is the first lesson in this course on Western Sociological Perspectives. This course is basically going to be about the different ideologies and different systems of thoughts that exists in the Western tradition. I'm sure that some of you would be familiar with some ideas like liberalism or secularism or feminism, right? So these are not some ideas. There's a whole group of them, and some of these ideas have changed according to time and place. They were different a century ago and 2 centuries ago, and now they're completely different. So the point of this course is to first of all understand where these ideas came from, why are they important, and why should a Muslim know about them, and why should we interact with these ideas and ideologies actually, and how to actually see what is good in them and what is bad in them. So just as anything, there's good and bad. So we can take the good and leave the bad. But obviously, in order to do this, in order to see what is good and to see what is bad in something, you have to first of all acknowledge it, understand it, and to be able to critically analyze it. So if a person is exposed to different ideologies, right? Like for example, let's say for example capitalism or Marxism, they would be easily persuaded, because each of these ideas, each of these perspectives, they're very convincing, they're very smooth. Okay, so if a layperson sees them, they would very easily be swayed by it, and we see that a lot of people are, because they do not see the fundamentals and the weaknesses of them. But on the other hand, we have different kinds of people, like a different group of people who are outright saying that there is nothing benefit in any of these ideologies, and that we should completely stay away from them, and that there is no good and benefit in them. So that is also another extreme. So there's 2 points. First is the that it is important to know these perspectives, because it equips us to not fall in error and to stay on the right path. But on the other hand, there is also reactionaries who are simply against it, because they believe that everything inside of it is wrong, which is incorrect. So this is the overview of this first lesson, right? But let's go into a bit more detail as to why should we actually study them. What are the reasonings for this? All right, so before we start, we have to talk about what is an ideology, like what is a perspective, right? A perspective is a point of view. A perspective, it's how you view a word, right? How you view things. It's your way of looking at things, your worldview, the way things seem to you, right? But ideology is a bit different, right? When we say ideology or when we say a perspective, this is the general definition. When you say it is a point of view or a worldview, in a more technical sense, like in sociology, ideology or a perspective would be described as a coherent system of ideas. All right, so it's not just a worldview, it's an entire collection of different ideas, an entire collection of ideas that are systematically connected to each other in a proper way. So for example, take let's say Islam, right? Islam is an ideology, right? Because it has a system of ideas, as in there's no one idea, there's many different ideas which are all added together or combined together in a very comprehensive and coherent way. Coherent means it is something understandable. So in Islam we have concept of justice, we have concept of economy, we have law, we have spirituality, we have everything, right? From spirituality to law to education, crime, all of these different ideas, justice, hospitality, and what is the role of psychology in it, right? The perspective on cosmology, right? These are different ideas, but they are all connected together under one comprehensive point of view, right? And so every religion that exists is an ideology because they all have a wide range of ideas, right? So Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, all of these are ideas. In fact, secularism is also an ideology, right? And agnosticism and even atheism, modern day atheism, is can also be arguably be classified as an ideology because they also have a set of ideas. Like if someone says they're atheist, you can 99% of time you can explain what their worldview is going to be, right? They're going to be mostly subscribing to liberal ideas, freedom, secularism, obviously, but also naturalism, materialism, the idea that natural and empirical view to about the world is the only way, right? And a lot of other different ideas you can. So this is how atheism can be classified as an ideology as well. So many times you would see that like um, people would often explain certain thing as if it is not an ideology, but once you can understand things and that certain um, concepts are more than just an idea, they are an entire ideology, then they're easy to be understood, and they're easy to be criticized and to be acknowledged and understood. Like once you understand that atheism has an ideology, then you can critique, right, the some parts of the ideology, some parts of the ideology, which means that if you criticize certain ideas within that ideology, then the entire system falls apart because different ideas are standing on top of other ideas. So some ideas are more foundational, right? So for example, think of a building, right? An ideology is like a building. There are some ideas at the bottom that acts as a foundation, and then there are other ideas which are on top of them, and it goes on and on and on. So with the case of atheism, for example, the fundamentals would be skepticism, naturalism, materialism, right? These would be considered the fundamental ideas. And then they have other concepts on top of that, like the naturalistic theory of evolution, but evolution can be seen in different perspectives, but naturalistic evolution, and then positivism, and then you can add liberalism and oftentimes other like Marxism and capitalism as economic ideologies on top of that, right? So it can be said that atheism is like a building which has levels of ideas in a coherent system. But if you can understand the fundamentals, you can know what is the fundamental, and you can criticize it, and you can show that it is weak, then the entire building can be damaged. And it is not just about damaging and criticizing, it is also to understand about your own worldview, your own ideology, and how important it is, right? All right, so ideologies can be political, they can be wait. They can be political, they can be economic, and they can be cultural. Political ideologies are basically ideologies which are related to government, right? How should the government be? Who should have the power? Who should have the sovereignty? Who should be the ruler? Who should have the power to make laws and judge and to administrator and to have the executive power, right? So you can have a whole range of ideologies about politics, like for example liberal democracy, right? Liberal democracy would is it is about the idea that people would make the laws directly, right? Democracy is not that you go and vote, and if you vote for a representative, they go to a parliament and they make laws for you. No, that's not what democracy actually is. Democracy is that the people, the everyday people, would make their laws directly. So whether what should be um, the term limit for the president, or what should be the law for traffic, and whether something should be legal or not, people would make the laws collectively, right? That is democracy in its literal sense. What you have nowadays in different countries is like in the US or in the UK or in other European countries, this is not actually democracy, but it is republic. So democracy has different kinds, like liberal democracy. Liberal democracy, it is a political ideology, which means that people should have the right to choose their leaders by voting, right? To voting representatives that can go and make laws for them to rule the country according to the will of the people, and people should have the freedom to criticize, to speech expression. They should basically have the freedom to exercise their will. Secularism is another political ideology which says that the state and religion should be separated. All right, we're going to look at each of these different ideologies in detail later on, right? So we're going to look at secularism in much more detail later on. But just to give a brief overview, secularism says is basically that the government and the religion should be separate. They should not interfere. So religion should not have any role in uh, politics, right? And whereas state should not have the right to interfere in the religion. Nationalism and socialism are two other political ideologies. Similarly, you have economic ideologies, and these are basically the ideologies which are about how the economy should be. Who should have the economic power? Who should have the means of production, right? How should labor be treated? Things like that. So economic ideologies, they are basically about how should the transaction, production, circulation of the money should be, right? It is about ideas related to money and goods. So capitalism and communism can be considered as economic uh, ideologies, but they are much more comprehensive. And then there is uh, cultural ideologies, and these are ideologies which are about your social values, morality, right? What should be good and bad? Okay, what should be good and bad? The laws in the society. What kind of values should you have, right? So individualism and progressivism. Now these are different ideologies that I'm mentioning, but I'm not going to explain each of them currently because we're going to go later on in our course and we're going to look at each of them in much more detail. But the it is supposed to be a current overview. So political, economic, and cultural ideologies, and oftentimes they intersect with each other. They're not separate ideologies. Like for example, in when you're talking about liberal democracy, it's not just about politics. There's also an economic and cultural element. So all of these are relevant and linked to each other, right? So for example, Western ideologies, when we're talking about Western ideologies, they emphasize on things like freedom, reason, secularism, human rights, and free markets. So individual freedom, what does it mean? It means that people have the right to say what they want, to do what they want, to express, to think what they want, right? To buy and own anything that they want without any interference and ridicule or discrimination by the government. All right. There are some limitations to this. For example, you cannot harm someone, but other than that, you are free to say whatever you want. Then reason. Reason is very simple, that they believe that reason should be prioritized, and your morality, your social norms, everything surrounding you should be based on reasonable grounds. But obviously things have changed, and now it's more complicated than that. We're going to again look at this in much more detail. All right, so this is the introduction. Now, one thing about Western ideologies and why they are so important is because during the last 200 to 300 years, Western countries they have started to colonize the whole world, right? They had started to go over go over the world and to spread their institutions, their ideas, their worldviews, while suppressing the indigenous epistemologies and ideas. So they went to Americas, they genocided the Native Americans. Not only they genocided the Native Americans, but they also abolished their institutions and their ideologies. Right? They must have had their own ideologies, must have had their own religions, but they were all abolished. And instead of that, they replaced it with the Western ideologies which currently exist in like America or Canada and the Mexico. Similarly, in the Muslim world, France, UK, and others also, uh, they got rid of the Islamic ideology, or the Hindu ideology, right? They got rid of these ideas, or they tried to get rid of them and to replace them with Western ideas, right? And they did it through multiple different ways. And if you notice, the thing is that now in the modern world, the entire globe has been influenced by Western ideologies to the point that we even consider Western ideologies to be completely normal, and what they say as simply how things are supposed to be. But what we don't realize is that a lot of our ideas that we consider to be normal are not actually normal, but they are part of the Western ideologies. For example, think about think about the idea mm, that you should get education, right? What is education? For example, your idea of education that people have nowadays, that you have this schooling system, you should be enrolled in a school at the age of 3, and until you're 30 years old you are going to be in this institution called school, where you're going to be taught by your teachers who are going to tell you and teach you the rules, norms, and the values of the society, right? So they're going to intellectually colonize you. And when you leave the school and you go to the colleges, same thing happens, and then in university as well, right? So what happens is that you're continuously You're continuously taught with different norms and values, and you're basically sort of programmed, right, all your life through these institutions of education and school. And this is what you think. Do you think that education means that the schooling system? But the fact is that education is not just limited to schools. It is different, that there was education before schools were introduced by the West, right? But this is considered normal, even though this is not normal but introduced by the West, right? So this is just one example. And yeah, that our entire political system that exists, economies, everything is based on the Western ideas. So this is why it's so important to understand them, so that we can understand our own local concepts, right? So how do Western ideologies shape society now? I mentioned about education and schools. I explained just now that these schools are transferring different values and facts, right? Not just about subjects, but other than that as well. This is referred to as hidden curriculum, right? There is the curriculum which is taught by the school, like your subjects, but there is also hidden curriculum, right? And what is hidden curriculum is that they are teaching you things which are hidden or unspoken. So for example, they teach you certain values and ideas like patriotism, nationalism, or respect for authority, punctuality and competition, individualism, right? So they're teaching you competition. Why are they teaching you competition? So that when you grow up, right, when you grow up and you have you are competitive, you will, instead of being collaborative, you will compete with others, right? So that when you enter the marketplace, when you enter into your jobs, you will be uh, you will you will have more chances to succeed, right? So this concept of in this competition, right, it comes from capitalism. It comes from capitalism because capitalism teaches you to focus on getting, like in simple terms, making as much money as possible, right? This is what capitalism is essentially about. It is about free markets. It is about individuals' freedom in economy. So competition means that each individual will basically fight with others and win the economic race, and they will basically succeed economically. So these ideas like competition, they have now been so ingrained that your school system teaches you without speaking about it openly. And when you are taught this value of competition, what happens is that you are more prone, sorry, not prone, you're more uh, susceptible to capitalism. And it means that you will view collaboration and unity uh, and basically acting in a selfless way, you will view that to be in a negative way, because you're not getting anything out of it. You want to be competitive, right? So so the school is teaching you these capitalistic values, and this is wrong, right? Because this goes against the Islamic concept of collaboration and unity, right? So you need to be aware of the education system and the schools, because they are constantly transferring us the Western ideological uh, values. But it's not just education, it's also media and pop culture. Our news, movies, television, social media, they're spreading Western values and ideologies globally, right? So our media, it creates this concept of picture of the world, right? Basically it gives you how the world is supposed to be. It gives you a piece of the world, right? It gives you a piece of the world which you consume as reality, right? But the thing is that what you see and you experience it to be a global affair is not actually a global affair. It is mostly Western. Like for example, think of um, the cultural discourse that exists, right? A lot of the cultural conflicts that exists online about, let's say, to give an example, let's look at this new movie or new concept, like for example, the Superman movie that came out, right? This is talking purely from a Western perspective. This is about a Western perspective. It is from a Western perspective. It is ingrained in the ideas of Western values, right? It, if you look at it, it is teaching you about the politics of the US, right? The politics of the US, and that is being spread to global audiences, right? So again, this is another example, but there's a lot more of it. And again, media, pop culture, all of these are constantly teaching us. There's also politics and law, right? This is a very important point because Western political ideologies, they have influenced the creation of laws and the political theory in many different countries. Consider Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Venezuela, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia. All of these countries in Latin America are purely influenced by Western ideological lens. Like all of them have a secular government. Why do they have a secular government? Did 1500 years ago, did the Native Americans have secularism? No. It was the Europeans that enforced it, right? So it is constantly affecting their uh, politics. But it's not just Latin America, it's all over the world. Even consider China, right? China is often seen as a competitor or basically an antagonist against the Western powers. But the belief, the fact is that China and its political ideas are coming from the same tradition, right? The political system that they has, which is ingrained in socialism or somewhat capitalism, uh, they are all coming from the same source. It's coming from Western thought, the Enlightenment. We're going to talk about Enlightenment in detail, but the idea of capitalism and Marxism and socialism, all of these ideas go back to the same source, which is the Enlightenment. And even China and Soviet Union that existed, and even North Korea, even though they're completely different to France, for example, their source is the same. Their fundamental ideas are the same. Their source are the same, right? But it's just that the ideas and the ideologies of West have become so globalized that even the politics, the political culture, the laws that exist, sorry, they're all part of the Western philosophical tradition. Like for example, many modern countries have the constitutions, right? Now this concept of constitutions was created by UK, right? UK and the France back in 1500s. And then as colonization spread around the world, people were given constitutions by the British and France and the other colonial powers, and and soon the entire world adopted the political ideas and ideologies of the West, and now we have the entire world with constitutions. In fact, the international law that exists, the United Nations, the international law of the UN is not a universal one. It is based on the ideas of Western ideologies. It is based on secularism. It is based on liberalism. It is based on um, Enlightenment thought. Okay, in many ways, it conflicts with the Islamic law in some ways, right? But the point is that the international law, the so-called international law, the UN Declaration for the UN Declaration of Human Rights, they are not universal. They're based on the Western thought. So, if you don't know this, you would consider them to be universal, even though they're not. Right. They also introduce your identity, who you are as a person, who do you believe yourself to be, right? What is your identity? All of that is shaped by Western ideologies. Like, for example, um, you like they have. I have been making the same point over and over again that they have globalized the Western ideas, which means that now things like youth culture, subcultures, celebrity values, and consumerism are all spreading. Right? Consumerism means that you, as a person, are seen as a consumer. Right? You are supposed to consume different products. You're supposed to spend the money to buy luxury and live a life of entertainment and enjoyment. Right? This is the concept from the Western concept of utopia, that you just spend the money and consume it, deeply rooted in the capitalistic thought, and which is then globalized all over the world. So now people are consuming it, and this shapes your identity because you, as a Muslim teenager, might be influenced by this. And if you have money, if you are given money, you will consume it. You will say that, you know it's something that you're supposed to do, so you should be careful, right? So why does this matter? Because you need to be self-aware. You need to study these ideologies to not just passively accept this, but ask what are the assumptions behind this TV show, right? Or textbook. Where are these ideas coming from, right? And whether they are helpful or not. The Islamic perspective is that you should seek wisdom and knowledge, right? So there are many hadiths, right? And the Quran itself teaches us to constantly learn and get knowledge, beneficial knowledge from wherever it is possible, right? The Prophet Muhammad SAW, he knew the beliefs of the Jews, Christians, and others, right? And then he discussed and debated with them, and then he shared the message of Islam with them. Many Sahaba knew about them, many scholars knew about this. They learned the beliefs of others, right? So that they could better understand it and to spread the dawah. Then, like Abdullah Al Andalusi, he asks, right, how can Muslims be witnesses to the truth if we don't know what the rest of mankind believes? Right, this is very important. How can we say that we are on the truth? How can we say that what we are saying is the truth if we don't know what the rest of the mankind believes in? Obviously, in order to have a communication with them, you need to know them. You need to, in order to have communication with them, in order to give dawah, you have to understand their perspectives. And if they are rooted deeply in their thoughts, you can give answers to their questions or the challenges which are presented, right? And then also Quran often gives us anecdotes from history, right? Why? Because it knows that stories from the past and history, it is it teaches us a lot of different things. It helps us with moral lessons. It teaches us the mistakes and successes of the people before. So similarly, you have to know about you have to know history, right? And history is not just limited to Islamic history. It's also about Western history, and not just political history, but also intellectual history, which is what we are talking about. So we need to know the intellectual history of the West and where it come from, what were the mistakes they made, what were the successes they made, and how can we avoid the mistakes that they made, and from the successes what can we learn, and how can we adapt them within our Islamic framework, right? What are the negative traits in the Western thoughts, like for example, hedonism or materialism, right? So yeah. Also, because of Western ideologies, they have really dominated the world, right? They're being globalized, and because of this, they're seen as universal. So anything that goes against the Western values is seen as really, really bad, because universal things, they're just universal. You cannot challenge them. And if some specific particular ideology is seen as universal, then it's really, really dangerous. So you have to know this, that these are not universal values, that they are particular values. Once you can know this, and you can explain this, and you can discuss it, and you can dissect it for others, then it is possible to criticize it. But if you're unable to do it, you are not going to be able to convince anyone. So Muhammad Asad, who was a revert to Islam, right? He wrote in his book that Western education often brings a secular or materialistic bias. Science is neither materialistic nor spiritual, but the West is materialistically predisposed and therefore anti-religious in its presuppositions. What is he talking about? He's saying that science itself is not materialistic and it is not against spirituality, right? But the the lens through which the West is looking at science, the ideology that the West is looking at science from. Like for example, if you have a binocular to your eyes and you have a lens, right? You are going to see things differently. So the West has science, but they are looking at science from a very different perspective. And that perspective is called naturalism or materialism. So, which means that they are not just doing science, but they are doing science in a very specific way. And the way they are doing it is wrong and anti religious. So, it's not science which is bad, but the way they are doing it. And this is dangerous because now the West would export and globalize their idea of science. So when someone learns about science, they are not just learning what science itself is, but they are learning science through the lens of the West, which is anti-religious in its presuppositions. And if you accept this definition of science, then it's going to conflict with your belief. So it's not that knowledge itself that's wrong, but the secular mindset through which it's taught. Yeah. So we need to seek ilm, we need to learn knowledge, as learning is a for the kifaya, and that there should always be a group of people who should be engaging with others, who should be having discourse and discussions and be engaged in a dialectic with different traditions. And it's not just about Western ideas but also Eastern ideas, right? But the reason why we are focusing on West so much is because they have become too dominant around the world, and their ideas are they are everywhere, and therefore it's important to learn it. And just as a doctor diagnoses a patient only if he understands the illness, we would also um, know our faith only if we can uh, see what the disease is, right? If you can know what the disease is, only then can you cure it. And that means that you have to understand the society and the influences on the society and where these ideas are coming from. And if you look at history, we just said that you need to learn history, right? So if you're looking at history, we see that in the Islamic golden age, Muslims were the one who were the most informed ones. They were the ones who were producing scholars and entire communities of scholars, right? And that is what gave us power, because we had knowledge. We could easily refute and debate anyone, right? So we have to strive for that once again. We have to reach that level once again. Yeah. So this was it. I hope you learned a lot from the first lesson. So this was just an overview. We're going to have a second lesson tomorrow, and it's going to be about the foundational concepts in sociology. So, Allah Hafiz. Thank you for listening.